The year was 2247, and humanity had finally earned its place among the Galactic Coalition. After decades of proving themselves worthy, humans now traveled freely across the stars, and their passports were recognized on over 40 different worlds. The transition had not been easy, and there were still those who questioned whether Earth's inhabitants truly belonged among the ancient spacefaring civilizations. But humanity had persisted, and they had built magnificent spaceports that connected their world to the greater universe beyond. The Atlanta Interstellar Transit Hub stood as one of the crown jewels of human engineering. It was a massive structure that stretched 5 miles across and rose nearly half a mile into the sky. Thousands of ships departed from its gates every single day and carried passengers to distant worlds where different cultures thrived under alien suns. The hub buzzed with activity as beings from dozens of species moved through its corridors, and the air hummed with the sound of 100 different languages being spoken at once. Maya Johnson stood at gate 7 with her small travel bag slung over her shoulder and her holographic passport clutched in her hand. She was 14 years old with dark brown skin and bright, curious eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. Her hair was pulled back into neat braids, and she wore the standard travel clothes that most young people wore for long space journeys. She had been looking forward to this day for months, and her excitement was barely contained. As she bounced slightly on her toes while waiting in line, she was headed to the education colony on Kepler 442b, which was one of the most prestigious learning institutions in the entire coalition. Only the brightest students from across the galaxy were accepted into its programs, and Maya had worked incredibly hard to earn her place there. She would be studying advanced physics and xenobiology under some of the greatest minds in known space. Her teachers back on Earth had told her that she had a gift for science, and this opportunity would allow her to develop that gift in ways that would have been impossible just a generation earlier. The line moved forward slowly, and Maya watched as the gate agent processed each passenger with mechanical efficiency. The agent was a Vorian named Kelzor, and he stood nearly 7 feet tall with silver skin that seemed to shimmer under the terminal lights. His species was one of the oldest members of the coalition, and they were known for their diplomatic skills and their sense of cultural superiority. Kelzor wore the standard uniform of the Transit Authority, but he carried himself with an air of importance that suggested he believed his position was far more significant than it actually was. Maya noticed that Kelzor seemed to process the alien passengers with a certain deference and respect. He took their documents carefully and examined them thoroughly before nodding and wishing them pleasant journeys. But when human passengers approached his station, his demeanor changed noticeably. He became curt and dismissive, and he barely looked at their documents before waving them through with obvious impatience. Maya felt a small flutter of nervousness in her stomach as she watched this pattern repeat itself again and again. Finally, it was her turn, and she stepped up to the counter with what she hoped was a confident smile. She had practiced this moment in her mind many times, and she was determined not to let any nervousness show through. She was representing not just herself but her family and her school, and in some small way her entire species. She wanted to make a good impression and show that human children could be just as poised and professional as any other species in the coalition. Kelzor looked down at her with an expression that was difficult to read, but Maya thought she detected a hint of disdain in his metallic eyes. She held out her passport and waited for him to take it, but instead of accepting it properly, he simply gestured impatiently for her to place it on the counter. Maya did as instructed and set the device down gently in front of him. The Vorian barely glanced at the holographic display before picking up the passport between 2 fingers, as if it were something unpleasant. He held it up to the light for a moment, and then, without warning, he tossed it carelessly onto the counter. The device skittered across the smooth surface and clattered to the floor on Maya's side of the station. The sound of it hitting the ground seemed impossibly loud in that moment, and Maya felt her cheeks grow hot with embarrassment. Several passengers in line behind her had witnessed what happened, and Maya could feel their eyes on her back. She quickly bent down to retrieve her passport from the floor, and when she stood back up, she tried to maintain her composure despite the humiliation she felt burning in her chest. Kelzor was looking at her with an expression that was now openly contemptuous, and he made no move to apologize for what he had done. "This cannot be real," Kelzor said in a tone that dripped with skepticism. "A human child traveling alone to an advanced education colony on Kepler. That seems highly unlikely to me." You will need to step aside while I verify this documentation with security. I have serious doubts about the authenticity of your credentials. Maya felt her carefully maintained composure begin to crack. She had done nothing wrong and her passport was completely legitimate. She had earned her place at the Kepler program through her own hard work and merit. There was no reason for this agent to treat her this way except for one obvious factor: that she could not change. She was human and she was young, and apparently that combination was enough to make her suspect in his eyes. "Sir," Maya said quietly, while trying to keep her voice steady, even though it trembled slightly, "my passport is completely valid, and all of my documentation is in order. My father works for the Federal Aviation and Space Administration, and he personally approved my travel clearance. There should not be any problems with my credentials." Kelzor let out a sound that might have been a laugh, but it held no humor. "I am quite sure that your father did approve your travel," he said with barely concealed contempt in his voice. "Humans and their nepotism are well known throughout the coalition. Your species has only been part of our community for 30 years, and already you believe you can bypass the standard procedures that the rest of us must follow. You do not belong in institutions that are meant for the truly elite students of our galaxy." Around them, other passengers continued to board their flights, and most of them simply walked around Maya as if she were nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle in their path. The Vorian gate agent looked at Maya with an expression that suggested he was greatly inconvenienced by her continued presence at his counter. He had already dismissed her in his mind and turned his attention to organizing some paperwork on his station. The line of passengers behind Maya had grown longer, and their complaints were becoming more vocal. Several of them were demanding to speak to a supervisor about the delay, and Kelzor seemed more concerned about their displeasure than about the young girl he had humiliated. "My father wants to speak with you," Maya said while holding out her communicator toward the agent. Her voice was still shaky, but there was a new note of determination in it. "He works for the Federal Aviation and Space Administration, and he needs to ask you some questions about why you are holding my passport." Kelzor glanced at the offered communicator with obvious irritation. He let out an exaggerated sigh and snatched the device from Maya's hand, with more force than was necessary. He held it up to his ear and spoke in a tone that made it clear he considered this entire situation to be beneath his attention and a waste of his valuable time. "Yes," Kelzor said curtly into the communicator. "This is Gate Agent Kelzor speaking. I am currently in the process of verifying some suspicious travel documents. If you could please hold while I complete my security protocols, I will return your device to the passenger in question. This is Commander Richard Johnson, and I am the Director of Interstellar Traffic Control for the North American sector." Richard's voice came through the communicator with a clarity that made several nearby passengers turn their heads. "I am calling regarding my daughter, Maya Johnson, who is attempting to board Flight 847 to Kepler 442b. You are currently holding her passport and preventing her from boarding her scheduled flight. I need you to explain to me exactly what security concern has prompted this action." Kelzor's silver skin flickered slightly, which was a sign of discomfort among his species, but his voice remained dismissive. "I am simply following standard verification procedures. Your daughter's credentials seem inconsistent with typical travel patterns. It is highly unusual for a human child to be traveling alone to an advanced educational facility. I am within my rights to verify the authenticity of her documentation." Richard's voice came back through the communicator, and now there was an edge to it that made Kelzor stand a bit straighter. "My daughter's credentials are not inconsistent, and they are certainly not suspicious. She earned her placement at the Kepler program through academic excellence. Her passport was issued by the State Department with full FAA authorization. Every piece of her documentation has been verified multiple times. So I will ask you again, and I want a direct answer this time. What specific security concern has prompted you to throw her passport on the floor and humiliate her in front of dozens of witnesses?" There was a long pause, and Kelzor seemed to be searching for words that would justify his actions without making himself look bad. "I merely placed the passport on the counter, and if it fell to the floor, that was an accident. As for my security concerns, humans have a documented history of fraudulent credential usage. Your species has only been part of the coalition for 3 decades. It is reasonable to exercise additional scrutiny." Richard's laugh came through the communicator, but it held no humor whatsoever. "Additional scrutiny? Is that what we are calling discrimination now?" Let me be very clear about something, Agent Kelzor. My daughter is a citizen of Earth, and she has every right to travel through human space without being subjected to prejudice treatment. You did not exercise additional scrutiny. You made a judgment based on her species and her age, and you decided she was not worthy of basic respect. I did no such thing, Kelzor protested, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. I am simply doing my job according to established protocols. If you have a complaint about those protocols, you should take it up with the Coalition Transit Authority. Oh, I will definitely be doing that, Richard said, and now his voice had gone very calm and very cold. But first, I want you to do something for me. I want you to look up at the departure board right now. Can you do that? Kelzor glanced up at the massive holographic display that dominated the terminal space above the gates. It showed all departing flights from the Atlanta hub with their destinations, departure times, and current status. Everything appeared normal, with ships listed as on time or boarding or preparing for departure. He looked back down at the communicator with confusion. I see the departure board, Kelzor said slowly. Everything appears to be operating normally. I do not understand what point you are trying to make. Keep watching, Richard said simply. For a moment nothing happened, and Kelzor was about to say something dismissive when suddenly the departure board began to change. Next to every single flight, new text appeared in bright red letters that were impossible to miss. The status for each ship changed from whatever it had been before to 3 words that sent a ripple of shock through the entire terminal.hold, FAA authorization required. The change happened simultaneously across the entire board, and within seconds every single departure from the Atlanta Interstellar Transit Hub was showing the same red warning. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Throughout the massive terminal, automated announcement chimes began sounding from hundreds of speakers. The pleasant automated voice that usually announced boarding calls and gate changes now delivered a very different message. Attention all passengers and crew, the system announced in multiple languages. All departures from Atlanta Interstellar Transit Hub are currently on administrative hold pending Federal Aviation and Space Administration clearance. No ships are authorized to depart until further notice. We apologize for this inconvenience and will provide updates as the situation develops. Please remain at your current gates and await further instructions. The announcement repeated itself in over 20 different languages to accommodate all the species present in the terminal. As the messages cycled through, the reaction from the thousands of passengers began to build. There were gasps of surprise and shouts of confusion. People pulled out their communicators to check flight information and confirm what they were seeing. Gate agents at other counters began frantically calling their supervisors for guidance. The entire hub, which moments before had been operating with smooth efficiency, had suddenly ground to a complete halt. Kelzor stared up at the departure board with his mouth hanging open in shock. His silver skin had paled to an ashen gray, and his hands were trembling slightly. Through the massive windows that lined the terminal walls, he could see ships that had already pulled back from their gates. They were now reversing course and returning to their docking positions. Flight crews were halting their departure procedures. Everything had stopped. Maya stood frozen at the gate counter while the reality of her situation began to sink in with crushing weight. The other passengers in line behind her were growing impatient, and she could hear them muttering among themselves in various languages. Some of them were complaining about the delay, while others were simply curious about what was causing the holdup. A few of the alien passengers shot her looks that ranged from mild annoyance to open disdain. It seemed that Kelzor was not the only one who questioned her right to be there. She looked down at her passport, which she had picked up from the floor, and noticed that there was a small scuff mark on its edge from where it had hit the ground. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she felt tears beginning to prick at the corners of her eyes. She absolutely refused to cry in front of all these people, though. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break down. She was stronger than that, and her father had raised her to stand tall even when things were difficult. But standing tall was becoming increasingly hard as the minutes ticked by, and Kelzor made no move to actually verify her documentation. He simply stood there behind his counter and looked at her with that same expression of barely concealed disgust. It was clear that he was in no hurry to resolve the situation, and Maya began to wonder if he was deliberately trying to make her miss her flight. If she missed this departure, she would not arrive at Kepler in time for the program. orientation, and that could jeopardize her entire placement. The announcement system chimed, and a pleasant automated voice informed everyone that Flight 847 to Kepler 442b would begin final boarding in 15 minutes. Maya felt a fresh wave of panic wash over her. She had to get on that flight. Her entire future depended on it. All those months of studying and preparing and dreaming about this opportunity could not end here at a gate counter because of one prejudiced agent who had decided she did not deserve to travel among the stars. She pulled out her personal communicator from her jacket pocket with trembling fingers. The device was small and sleek, and it had been a gift from her father for her 13th birthday. He had told her that she should only use it to contact him during work hours if there was a genuine emergency. Maya had never called him at work before because she had never needed to. She was a responsible kid who could handle most problems on her own. But this situation was far beyond her ability to handle, and she needed help desperately. She tapped the contact labeled Dad and waited while the connection was established. The communicator chimed once and then twice, and Maya found herself holding her breath while she waited for him to answer. "Please pick up," she thought frantically. "Please, please, please pick up. I really need you right now. Commander?" Richard Johnson was sitting in a conference room on the 15th floor of the Federal Aviation and Space Administration headquarters building in Washington, D.C. He was in the middle of what was turning out to be a very long and very boring budget meeting. Around the table sat 12 other high-ranking officials from various departments, and they were discussing the allocation of resources for the next fiscal year. It was exactly the kind of meeting that made Richard question his career choices, even though he genuinely loved his job most of the time. His personal communicator buzzed against his hip, and he frowned slightly. That particular line was reserved for family emergencies only, and everyone who had that number knew not to use it unless something serious had happened. His wife Karen was at work herself today, and she would not interrupt him unless it was urgent. That left only one person who might be calling, and Richard felt his chest tighten with sudden concern. He held up a hand to interrupt the budget director, who was droning on about operational costs, and the man stopped speaking with a slightly annoyed expression. Richard stood up from his chair and moved toward the door while pulling out his communicator. The other officials watched him go with varying degrees of curiosity and concern. They all knew that Richard was not the type to leave important meetings without a very good reason. He stepped out into the hallway and closed the conference room door behind him before answering the call. Maya's name was displayed on the screen, and Richard felt his worry intensify. His daughter was supposed to be boarding her flight to Kepler right about now. If she was calling him instead of boarding, something had gone very wrong. "Dad?" Maya's voice came through the communicator, and Richard could immediately hear the strain in it. She was trying to sound calm, but he could detect the tremor that she was attempting to hide. He had been a father long enough to know when his child was upset and trying to be brave about it. "I need help. I am at the gate, but the agent will not let me board. He threw my passport on the floor and he says it is not real. He says I do not belong at Kepler and that humans should not be in elite programs. Everyone is watching and I do not know what to do." Richard felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. His hand tightened around the communicator and his jaw clenched so tightly that his teeth ached. Through the conference room window, he could see his colleagues looking at him with concern, because apparently his expression had changed dramatically in the space of a few seconds. He forced himself to take a slow breath before responding, because losing his temper would not help Maya right now. She needed him to be calm and in control. "Sweetheart," Richard said in a voice that was carefully level even though fury was beginning to build behind his words. "I need you to take a deep breath for me. You have done nothing wrong, and your passport is completely legitimate. This agent is breaking protocol and he is going to regret it very shortly. I want you to put him on the line right now. Can you do that for me?" Maya nodded even though her father could not see her, and then she turned to face Kelzor, who was still standing behind his counter. The chaos in the terminal built rapidly as the reality of the situation began to sink in for the thousands of passengers who had been caught in the sudden lockdown. Business travelers who had important meetings on distant worlds began shouting at gate agents and demanding explanations. Families with young children looked around in confusion while trying to figure out what was happening. Diplomatic envoys pulled out their communicators to contact their embassies, and report the unprecedented situation. The Atlanta Interstellar Transit Hub had never experienced a complete shutdown like this in its entire operational history. "What have you done?" Kelzor whispered into the communicator while still staring up at the departure board in horror. "You cannot do this. There are thousands of passengers here. There are coalition officials and diplomats and business leaders. You are creating an interstellar incident. This is completely unauthorized and illegal." Richard's voice came back through the communicator with that same cold calm that was somehow more frightening than if he had been shouting. "Actually, Agent Kelzor, this is completely authorized. As Director of Interstellar Traffic Control for the North American sector, I have the authority to halt all departures from any hub under my jurisdiction if I determine there is a security or safety concern. I have exercised that authority. Every ship that departs from the Atlanta hub requires FAA clearance, and I have temporarily revoked that clearance for all flights. You cannot possibly justify this action," Kelzor protested desperately. "There is no legitimate security concern. You are abusing your authority because of a personal grievance. The coalition will hear about this and you will lose your position." "On the contrary," Richard replied, and now there was steel in his voice. "I can absolutely justify this action. You see, there is a very serious security concern at Gate 7. There is a gate agent who is making unauthorized determinations about passenger credentials based on species prejudice rather than actual security protocols. That agent threw the passport of a minor passenger on the floor. That agent publicly humiliated a child who has done nothing wrong. That represents a fundamental failure of the system that I am responsible for maintaining. But this affects thousands of people," Kelzor said, and his voice had risen to something close to panic. "You are punishing all these passengers for something that involves only one person." "Exactly," Richard said, and his tone made it clear that this was precisely the point he wanted to make. "Thousands of people are now experiencing a fraction of the humiliation and frustration that my 14-year-old daughter experienced at your counter. The difference is that these passengers will be delayed for a short time. My daughter was denied her dignity and her right to travel freely. She was made to feel like she did not belong among the stars. That is something that will stay with her far longer than any flight delay." Maya stood at the counter and listened to her father's words while tears finally began to stream down her face. But these were not tears of fear or humiliation anymore. These were tears of relief and gratitude, because she realized that her father was fighting for her in the most dramatic way possible. He had literally stopped the entire spaceport to defend her right to be treated with respect. She had never felt more loved or protected in her entire life. Around Gate 7, the atmosphere had changed significantly. The passengers who had been so dismissive of Maya were now looking at her with very different expressions. Some appeared shocked while others seemed thoughtful or even ashamed. A few of the alien passengers were whispering among themselves and shooting nervous glances at Kelzor. It was becoming clear that the arrogant gate agent had created a situation that was spiraling far beyond his control. Vorian Ambassador, who had been waiting at Gate 5 for his own flight, came striding across the terminal toward the commotion. He was dressed in elaborate diplomatic robes and carried himself with the natural authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. His name was Varel, and he was known throughout the coalition as a skilled negotiator and peacemaker. Behind him came several other officials, including a Centaurian trade minister and a human security captain. They had all recognized that something extraordinary was happening, and they wanted to understand the situation before it escalated further. "What is the meaning of this delay?" Ambassador Varel demanded as he approached Kelzor's counter. His voice carried the weight of generations of diplomatic training, and his expression made it clear that he expected immediate answers. "I have urgent coalition business on Proxima Station. There are peace talks that cannot be delayed. Why have all departures been halted?" Kelzor opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, Richard's voice came through the communicator again. This time it was not directed at Kelzor, but at the terminal's public address system. Somehow Richard had connected his communication to the hub's main speakers, and now his voice filled every corner of the massive space. "Good afternoon to all travelers at Atlanta Interstellar Transit Hub," Richard said, and his voice was calm and professional and authoritative. "This is Commander Richard Johnson speaking. I am the Director of Interstellar Traffic Control for the Federal Aviation and Space Administration. I want to apologize for the disruption to your travel plans, but I also want to take a moment to explain exactly why every departure from this hub has been temporarily grounded. Throughout the terminal, passengers stopped what they were doing and turned their attention to the nearest speakers. Even those who had been shouting complaints fell silent because there was something in Richard's tone that demanded to be heard. Maya watched as thousands of eyes turned toward the information displays where her father's face now appeared. He looked exactly as she remembered him from breakfast that morning, but there was something different about his expression now. He looked tired but also absolutely determined. 30 years ago, humanity joined the Galactic Coalition, Richard continued, and his words echoed through the vast space. We were the newest members of an organization that had existed for thousands of years. We were the least experienced in space travel. We were the most scrutinized. We understood that we had to prove ourselves worthy of membership in this ancient community, and we accepted that challenge. He paused and let his words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. And we have proven ourselves. In 3 decades, humanity has contributed significantly to coalition defense initiatives. We have shared our scientific discoveries freely. We have opened our world to trade and cultural exchange. We have sent our best and brightest to learn from other species and to teach what we know in return. We have earned our place among the stars through hard work and dedication and mutual respect. His expression hardened slightly, and his voice took on an edge that made many listeners shift uncomfortably. But it seems that some individuals have decided that because we are newer to the galactic stage, we are somehow lesser than other species, that our children do not deserve the same respect and opportunities as theirs, that our credentials and our authority and our basic dignity can be questioned without consequence, simply because we have not been traveling the stars for as long as others have. Richard's image on the screen shifted slightly as the view widened to show the FAA command center behind him. Dozens of officers could be seen working at their stations and monitoring various displays that showed the complete shutdown of one of Earth's busiest spaceports. The visual made it clear that this was not some impulsive action by an angry parent, but rather a deliberate decision by someone with the authority and infrastructure to back it up. This was not a tantrum, but a statement of policy. My 14-year-old daughter, Maya Johnson, is a straight-A student who earned her placement at the Kepler Colony Education Program through merit alone, Richard said, and now his voice carried a note of fierce pride. She studied for months to prepare for the entrance examinations. She competed against thousands of applicants from dozens of species. She was accepted because she is intelligent and hardworking and deserving. She has done everything right. He paused again, and his expression grew darker. But today, when she arrived at Gate 7 to board her flight, she was treated with contempt by gate agent Kelzor. Her valid passport was thrown carelessly to the floor. She was accused of fraud and nepotism. She was told that humans do not belong in elite institutions. She was humiliated in front of dozens of witnesses who did nothing to intervene or defend her. She was made to feel like she was not worthy of traveling among the stars. Throughout the terminal, many of the passengers who had been at Gate 7 suddenly found themselves unable to meet the eyes of those around them. A few began quietly moving away from the area, as if distance might somehow absolve them of their complicity. The Centaurian trade minister who had followed Ambassador Vrel looked particularly uncomfortable, and she was whispering urgently to her aide. So I made a decision. Richard continued, and his voice was like iron now. If one human child cannot travel with dignity through this terminal, then nobody travels through this terminal. Not until we address this fundamental problem. Not until everyone present understands something very important about humanity and about how we will operate in this galaxy going forward. He leaned forward slightly and looked directly into the camera. We will not tolerate discrimination against our people. We will not accept being treated as second-class citizens in our own space. We will not allow our children to be humiliated by those who think their species' longer history gives them the right to look down on others. And we will use every resource at our disposal to ensure that respect is not a one-way street in this coalition. The terminal had gone almost completely silent now, except for the hum of environmental systems and the distant sound of idling ships. Thousands of beings from dozens of worlds stood or sat in stunned silence while they processed what they were hearing. Many of them were realizing for the first time that humanity was not going to quietly accept discrimination. They were not going to smile and be grateful for whatever scraps of respect were offered. They were going to demand equality, and they had the power to enforce that demand. Ambassador Vrel stood at Gate 7 and listened to Richard's words with a grave expression. As a Vorian himself, he felt a particular responsibility to address what had happened. His species prided themselves on their diplomatic skills and their adherence to coalition values. The fact that one of his own people had acted so shamefully was something he could not ignore. He turned to look at Kelzor, and the gate agent seemed to shrink under the weight of that gaze. "Is this true?" Ambassador Vrel asked quietly. "Did you treat a child in the manner that Commander Johnson has described?" Kelzor tried to respond, but his voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "I was following protocols. I had concerns about the documentation. I did not intend any disrespect." "You did not intend disrespect," the ambassador repeated slowly. "Yet you threw her passport on the floor. You accused her of fraud. You told her she did not belong in an elite program. If those actions were not intended to convey disrespect, then I am deeply concerned about what you consider respectful behavior." He turned away from Kelzor and looked at Maya, who was still standing at the counter with tears on her face and her passport clutched in her hands. The ambassador's expression softened, and he approached her with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his imposing stature. He knelt down so that he could look her in the eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was filled with genuine remorse. "Young lady," Ambassador Vrel said softly, "I am Ambassador Vrel of the Vorian Diplomatic Corps, and I want to offer you my most sincere apologies for how you were treated here today. What happened to you was wrong. It was prejudiced. It was cruel. And it does not represent the values that the coalition is supposed to uphold." He held out his hand, and Maya hesitantly placed her passport in it. The ambassador examined the document carefully and then nodded with clear approval. "Your credentials are not just valid, but they are exceptional. Your academic achievements are remarkable. You are a credit to your species, and you will be a valued addition to the Kepler program. Anyone who suggests otherwise is speaking from ignorance and prejudice rather than from fact." The ambassador handed the passport back to Maya with a formal bow that demonstrated deep respect. "I have a granddaughter who is about your age. She is studying diplomatic protocols on our homeworld. If anyone ever treated her the way you were treated today, I would tear down mountains to defend her. Your father is absolutely right to do what he has done. He is showing the galaxy that humanity will not tolerate injustice against their children." Maya accepted her passport back and managed a small smile through her tears. "Thank you, Ambassador. That means a lot to me." The Centaurian trade minister had been listening to this exchange, and now she stepped forward as well. Her species communicated partly through clicking sounds that were translated by devices worn at her throat. When she spoke, her voice came through the translator with a musical quality that was distinctive to her people. "Commander Johnson, Minister Zella of Centauri Prime speaking," she said while addressing one of the nearby communication panels. "I believe I speak for many present when I say that your point has been made clearly and powerfully. The coalition was founded on principles of equality and mutual respect. Those principles must apply to all member species, regardless of how long they have been part of our community. What happened to your daughter today has opened many eyes to problems that we have been too comfortable ignoring." She turned to address the crowd of passengers who had gathered around Gate 7. "I propose that we, who have witnessed this incident, submit a formal commendation for Commander Johnson's actions to the Coalition Ethics Committee. His response, while certainly disruptive, has highlighted a systemic problem that requires immediate attention. We cannot claim to be an enlightened galactic community if we allow children to be treated with such casual cruelty." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled crowd, and several other officials and dignitaries began to step forward to voice their support. A delegation of human business, leaders who had been waiting at Gate 12, arrived to show solidarity with Maya. Two scientists from the Kepler program itself, who happened to be returning from a conference, pushed through the crowd to assure Maya that she would be welcomed with open arms when she arrived. The atmosphere in the terminal was shifting from confusion and anger to something that resembled collective shame and determination to do better. News of the shutdown had spread beyond the terminal itself and was now being broadcast across the galactic communication network. On Vorian Prime, the homeworld of Kelzor's species, the High Council convened an emergency session to discuss the incident. The Vorians prided themselves on being one of the most respected species in the coalition, and this public embarrassment was causing significant concern among their leadership. Several council members were already drafting formal apologies to Earth's government and proposing new cultural sensitivity training for all Vorians working in human space. On Centauri Prime, the incident was being discussed in their parliament as well. Minister Zella's words had been transmitted back to her homeworld, and her proposal for a full review of how humans were treated in Centaurian space was gaining rapid support. The Centaurians had always considered themselves to be fair and just, but they were now being forced to examine whether their actions matched their ideals. It was an uncomfortable but necessary conversation. Back in the Atlanta terminal, Captain Helen Morris of Terminal Security had arrived with a full team of officers. She was a stern-faced woman with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun, and she carried herself with the authority of someone who had maintained order in chaotic situations for decades. She took one look at Kelzor standing behind his counter, and her expression hardened even further. She had reviewed the security footage from Gate 7 on her way over, and she had seen exactly what had happened. "Agent Kelzor," Captain Morris said in a voice that could have cut steel, "you are hereby relieved of duty pending a full investigation into your conduct. Please surrender your security credentials and come with my officers. You will be escorted to a holding area where you will remain until this matter is resolved." Kelzor's silver skin had now taken on a sickly gray tone, and his hands were visibly shaking as he removed his credential badge from his uniform. "I was only following protocols," he said weakly. "I did not intend for any of this to happen. I was just doing my job." "No," Captain Morris said flatly. "You were not doing your job. You were exercising personal prejudice against a child who had done nothing wrong. There is a significant difference between proper security protocols and discrimination. You are about to learn that difference in very clear terms." Two security officers moved forward and positioned themselves on either side of Kelzor. They did not physically restrain him, but their presence made it clear that he was not being given a choice about cooperating. The former gate agent cast one last look at Maya, and there might have been regret in his expression, but it was far too late for apologies. He had made his choices, and now he would face the consequences. The officers led him away through the terminal, and passengers moved aside to let them pass while whispering among themselves. Ambassador Vrel watched Kelzor being escorted away, and then turned back to Maya. He reached into his diplomatic robes and pulled out a small data chip which he held out to her. "This is a personal voucher for first-class accommodations on your journey to Kepler," he said. "It is the least I can offer to begin making amends for how you were treated. Additionally, I am authorizing a personal letter of recommendation from the Vorian Diplomatic Corps to accompany your file at the Kepler program. I want to ensure that everyone there knows you arrive with the full support and respect of the Coalition's diplomatic community." Maya accepted the chip with wonder. She had never traveled first class before, and the gesture meant more to her than just the upgraded seat. It was a symbol that she was being recognized as someone worthy of respect, someone whose dignity mattered, someone who belonged among the stars just as much as anyone else. On the screens throughout the terminal, Richard's face appeared again, and this time his expression had softened slightly. "I want to thank Ambassador Vrel and Minister Zella for their quick response and their recognition of the problem," he said. "You have both demonstrated the kind of leadership that makes the Coalition strong. You have shown that it is possible for different species to work together to address injustice when it occurs. That gives me hope for the future of our galactic community." He paused and seemed to consider his next words carefully. "I am now lifting the departure hold on all flights from Atlanta Interstellar Transit Hub. All ships are cleared to resume normal operations and complete their scheduled departures. Gate agents, please begin boarding procedures for your respective flights. I apologize again for the disruption, but I hope that everyone present has gained a better understanding of humanity's position on these matters." Throughout the terminal, the announcement chimes sounded again, and the red warning text on the departure boards began to flicker and change. Within seconds, the status indicators returned to their normal green and flights were once again listed as boarding or preparing for departure. There was an almost audible sigh of relief from thousands of passengers who had been caught in the lockdown. Gate agents returned to their stations and began calling for passengers to board their flights. But before the crowd could fully disperse, Richard spoke one more time, and his voice carried a note of finality that made everyone pause to listen. "To everyone traveling through human space today and every day in the future, you are welcome here. We genuinely value the exchange of cultures and ideas and friendships that you bring to our world. We are honored to be part of the galactic community, and we look forward to continuing to build relationships with species from across the stars. His expression became very serious, and his eyes seemed to look directly at each person watching. All we ask in return is that you treat us, and especially our children, with the same respect that you expect for yourselves and your own families. We are all travelers in this vast universe. We are all trying to make our way among the stars. Let us do so together with dignity and mutual understanding. Let us build a coalition that truly lives up to its founding principles of equality and respect for all species. The screens went dark, and for a long moment, the entire terminal was completely silent. It was as if tens of thousands of people were all holding their breath at the same time, while they processed what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly at first, but building rapidly, applause began to spread through the crowd. It started with just a few humans who were standing near Gate 7 and who had witnessed the entire incident from beginning to end. They began clapping slowly and deliberately while looking at Maya with expressions of pride and solidarity. Then other humans throughout the terminal joined in, and the sound of applause grew louder. But what was truly remarkable was when the alien passengers began to clap as well. Vorians and Centaurians and dozens of other species added their voices to the show of support. Some species did not clap, but instead made their own traditional gestures of approval and respect. Maya stood at the counter with tears streaming down her face, but these were tears of relief and gratitude rather than humiliation. She looked around at the thousands of beings who were showing their support, and she felt something shift inside her. The shame and embarrassment that had been weighing on her chest began to lift. She realized that what had started as the worst moment of her young life had transformed into something powerful and important. Her father had not just defended her, but he had made a statement that would echo across the galaxy. Captain Morris approached Maya with a gentle smile that seemed almost out of place on her usually stern face. "Your flight is boarding now," she said kindly. "First class, courtesy of Ambassador Vrel. I think you have quite a story to tell your classmates when you arrive at Kepler. You're going to be famous by the time your ship lands." Maya wiped her eyes and managed a shaky smile. "Will my dad get in trouble for what he did? I do not want him to lose his job because of me." The captain actually laughed at that, and it was a warm, genuine sound. "Trouble? Sweetheart, by tomorrow morning your father is going to be the most respected human in the entire coalition. Parents across 40 different worlds are going to be grateful for what he did today. He showed everyone that humanity will not tolerate injustice against their children. That is not the kind of thing that gets someone fired. That is the kind of thing that gets someone promoted." She put a hand on Maya's shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Now go on and board your flight. You have earned your place at that program, and nobody is ever going to question that again. Make your father proud by showing them all what human students are capable of achieving." Maya picked up her travel bag and headed toward the boarding tunnel. As she walked, passengers from various species moved aside to let her pass, and many of them nodded respectfully or offered words of encouragement in their own languages. The Vorian passengers seemed particularly eager to make eye contact and demonstrate their support. It was clear that Kelsor's behavior had embarrassed them deeply, and they wanted to show that his prejudice did not represent their species as a whole. When Maya entered the first-class section of the ship, she was amazed by what she saw. The seats were large and comfortable with personal entertainment systems and adjustable privacy screens. The lighting was soft and calming. There were only about 20 seats in the entire section compared to the hundreds in standard class. A flight attendant, a graceful being from the Delphinian species, greeted her with a warm smile and helped her find her seat. "Welcome aboard," the attendant said in accented but clear English.
"We are honored to have you flying with us today.
If you need anything at all during the journey, please do not hesitate to ask. Your comfort and safety are our highest priorities." Maya settled into her seat and strapped in for departure. Through the window, she could see the bustling activity of the terminal below. Ships were departing on schedule now, and the hub had returned to its normal, efficient operation, but she knew that nothing was truly the same as it had been before. Something fundamental had changed in how humanity was perceived by the other species of the coalition. The ship's engines hummed to life, and Maya felt the familiar sensation of the vessel lifting off from its docking clamps. The Atlanta Interstellar Transit Hub fell away below them as the ship climbed through Earth's atmosphere. Maya pressed her face to the window and watched her home planet shrink into a beautiful blue and white sphere. suspended against the darkness of space. Somewhere down there, her father was probably dealing with a mountain of communications from various coalition officials and government representatives. She pulled out her communicator and sent him a quick message. "Thank you, Dad. I love you more than all the stars in the galaxy. You are my hero." The reply came back almost immediately. "I love you too, sweetheart. Now go show them what Johnson family brilliance looks like. Make them remember that humanity belongs among the stars just as much as any other species. And remember that you earned your place there through your own hard work and intelligence. Never let anyone make you doubt that." Maya smiled and tucked her communicator away. The ship was accelerating now, and soon it would engage its faster-than-light drive. She would spend the next several hours in transit, and then she would arrive at Kepler 442b to begin her studies. She thought about everything she wanted to learn and all the amazing discoveries she hoped to make. She thought about the friends she would meet from different worlds and cultures. She thought about the future she was building for herself among the stars. But most of all, she thought about what her father had done for her. He had stopped an entire spaceport to defend her dignity. He had shown the galaxy that humanity would not accept discrimination. He had made it clear that human children were just as valuable and deserving of respect as any other children in the coalition. That was a gift that went far beyond first-class seats or letters of recommendation. That was a legacy that would shape how humans were treated throughout the galaxy for generations to come. The ship engaged its FTL drive, and the stars stretched into brilliant lines of light around her. Maya felt a sense of peace settle over her as she watched the universe blur past. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, and she was going to make the most of this opportunity. She was going to study harder than anyone else. She was going to prove that her father's faith in her was justified. She was going to show the galaxy that humanity produced brilliant minds capable of contributing to the advancement of all species. As the ship hurtled through the void between stars, Maya closed her eyes and let herself imagine the future. She saw herself as a scientist making groundbreaking discoveries. She saw herself as a teacher, sharing knowledge with students from 100 different worlds. She saw herself as an ambassador for humanity, showing others that Earth's children could stand alongside anyone in pursuit of excellence. And through it all, she would remember this day and the lesson her father had taught her about standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Back on Earth, Richard Johnson sat in his office and watched the news feeds from across the galaxy. The story of what had happened at Atlanta Interstellar Transit Hub was spreading like wildfire through every major communication network. Some outlets were praising his actions as a necessary stand against discrimination. Others were criticizing him for causing such massive disruption over what they called a minor incident. But regardless of which side people took, everyone was talking about it. Humanity's place in the coalition was being discussed and debated on every world. His superior, Administrator Patricia Green, entered his office without knocking. She was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and an expression that revealed nothing about what she was thinking. Richard braced himself for what was coming. He had known there would be consequences for his actions, even if he believed those actions were justified. Shutting down an entire spaceport was not something that would be overlooked by the bureaucracy. "Commander Johnson," Administrator Green said as she closed the door behind her, "I have spent the last 2 hours fielding calls from the Secretary of Transportation, the Coalition Transit Authority, 3 different ambassadors, and the President's office. Do you have any idea how much chaos you created today?" Richard met her gaze steadily. "Yes, ma'am. I am fully aware of the disruption I caused. I am prepared to accept whatever disciplinary action you deem appropriate. However, I want to be clear that I would make the same decision again if faced with similar circumstances. My daughter was treated with prejudice and cruelty, and I used the authority granted to me by this office to address that injustice." Administrator. Green was silent for a long moment, and then something unexpected happened. She smiled. It was a small smile, but it was genuine. "Good answer," she said, "because if you had said anything else, I would have been very disappointed in you." She moved to sit in one of the chairs across from his desk. "The President called me personally to tell me that what you did today was exactly the kind of leadership that humanity needs as we navigate our place in the coalition. Yes, you caused massive disruption. Yes, there will be formal complaints filed. But you also made it crystal clear that we will not tolerate discrimination against our people. That message was worth every minute of delay and every angry call I had to field." Richard felt relief wash over him, but he kept his expression professional. So I am not being fired? Fired? Administrator Green laughed. Richard, you are probably going to be promoted. The secretary wants you to testify before the Senate Committee on Interstellar Affairs next week. They want you to help draft new protocols for how coalition species working in human space should be trained on anti-discrimination policies. You have become the face of humanity's stand for equal treatment within the coalition. She leaned forward slightly, and her expression grew more serious. But I need you to understand something. What you did today is going to have consequences that extend far beyond one gate agent losing his job. You have essentially challenged the entire power structure of the coalition. The older species have grown comfortable with the idea that they are superior to newcomers like us. They are not going to give up that attitude without a fight. I understand, Richard said, but if we do not fight for our dignity now, we will spend the next century being treated as lesser members of the coalition. I would rather face pushback now than teach my grandchildren that they should accept discrimination as the price of membership in the galactic community. The administrator nodded approvingly. That is exactly the kind of thinking we need. Humanity did not come this far by accepting limitations imposed by others. We reached the stars through determination and innovation. We earned our place in the coalition through hard work and sacrifice, and now we are going to earn the respect that should have been given to us from the beginning. She stood up and moved toward the door but paused before leaving. How is Maya doing? I heard she made her flight. Richard smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he had worn since the whole situation began. She sent me a message from the ship. She is doing fine. Probably better than fine, actually. She is in first class thanks to Ambassador Vrel, and she has a personal recommendation from the Vorian Diplomatic Corps. I think she is going to arrive at Kepler as something of a celebrity. Good, Administrator Green said. She deserves to be celebrated. She handled herself with remarkable composure during a very difficult situation. You should be proud of her. After the administrator left, Richard turned his attention back to the news feeds. He was watching a panel discussion on one of the major coalition news networks where representatives from various species were debating the incident. A Vorian political analyst was arguing that Richard had overreacted and caused unnecessary disruption. But a human sociologist was countering that argument by pointing out the long history of subtle discrimination that humans had faced since joining the coalition. What Commander Johnson did was not an overreaction, the sociologist said passionately. It was a measured response to a systemic problem that has been allowed to fester for 3 decades. How many human children have been made to feel inferior by gate agents or teachers or employers who believe that our species is somehow less worthy of respect? How many times have humans had to smile and accept casual prejudice because we were afraid of being seen as difficult or ungrateful for our place in the coalition? The Vorian analyst tried to interrupt, but the sociologist continued. Today, one father said enough. He used the authority granted to him by his position to demonstrate that humanity will not tolerate discrimination, and the fact that so many people are angry about the disruption rather than angry about the injustice that caused it tells me that this conversation was long overdue. Richard watched the debate play out and felt a strange mix of emotions. He was proud of what he had accomplished, but also aware that he had potentially made his daughter's life more complicated. Maya would now be known throughout the coalition as the girl whose father stopped an entire spaceport. That kind of attention could be difficult for a teenager to handle. He hoped she was strong enough to bear it. His personal communicator buzzed, and he looked down to see another message from Maya. This one included a photo of her, sitting in her first-class seat with a huge smile on her face. The caption read, Dad, I just met a Centaurian student who is also heading to Kepler. Her name is Zira, and she told me that her parents saw what happened on the news. They called her to tell her to look out for me and to make sure I know I have friends there. I think things are going to be okay. Richard felt his throat tighten with emotion as he looked at his daughter's happy face. She was going to be fine. More than fine. She was going to thrive because she now knew with absolute certainty that she had every right to be among the stars. She knew that her father would move mountains to protect her, and she knew that there were people across the galaxy who believed in equality and justice, and who were willing to stand with humanity as they fought for those principles. He typed out a reply. I am so glad to hear that, sweetheart. Make sure to thank Zira's parents for their kindness. Remember that most beings in the galaxy are good and fair. Today was about standing up to the ones who are not. Study hard and make friends and show them what humanity is capable of. I love you to the stars and back. As Richard sent the message, he leaned back in his chair and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Yes, there would be difficult conversations ahead. Yes, there would be political battles to fight. Yes, there would be those who resented humanity's refusal to accept a subordinate role in the coalition. But none of that mattered as much as the simple fact that his daughter was safe and happy and heading toward her future with confidence. Humanity had come to the stars as the newest and least experienced species in the galactic coalition. They had faced skepticism and discrimination and countless small indignities, but they had also proven themselves capable and determined and unwilling to accept injustice. Today had been a turning point. Today had been the moment when humanity served notice that they would demand respect rather than hoping for it. Today had been the day when one father's love for his daughter became a rallying cry for an entire species. And somewhere on a ship traveling faster than light toward a distant world, a 14-year-old girl with dreams of becoming a great scientist smiled at the stars and knew that she belonged among them.